Welcome to Novelty, your destination for a deep dive into the intricacies of influence, politics, innovation, and so much more. I'm Levon, your host, and today on Novelty, we take a solemn moment to reflect on the Armenian Genocide, remembering the massive crime against humanity and the lives lost between 1915 and 1923. As we honor the memory of those who suffered, we must also recognize the enduring struggle for justice that continues to this day. The pursuit of acknowledgement and accountability remains a critical mission, one that is deeply tied to the fight for human rights worldwide. Our program today is dedicated to exploring the ongoing efforts to secure justice for the Armenian Genocide. We're honored to be joined by Kevork Hagopjian, a board member of the Armenian Legal Center for Justice and Human Rights, the ALC, and together we'll discuss the ALC's mission and current objectives, including their work in global forums such as the United Nations and its agencies. We'll delve into ALC's involvement in the Universal Periodic Review of Azerbaijan, the work for the fair treatment and release of Artsakh's prisoners of war, and the recent submissions for Magnitsky sanctions. Additionally, we'll cover their role in introducing bipartisan legislation on the Azerbaijan Sanction Review Act. It's of utmost importance to properly recognize the Armenian Genocide, not just through resolutions and statements, but by holding the guilty party, Turkey, responsible for its actions. For decades, we've been asserting that not punishing the perpetrators of genocide only emboldens them to commit further atrocities. Today, unfortunately, we're witnessing this grim reality as Turkey and Azerbaijan continue their aggressive actions against the Armenian people. The pursuit of justice for the Armenian Genocide is about much more than honoring the memory of the victims. It is a call to action for all nations to uphold the principles of justice, accountability, and the rule of law. Failure to act on this sets a dangerous precedent, allowing history to repeat itself and paving the way for future human rights violations. Since Armenia's independence, subsequent governments have assumed the responsibility of pursuing justice for the Armenian Genocide in international forums, alongside diaspora organizations. However, unfortunately, the current government of Armenia, led by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, has abdicated itself of this responsibility and increasingly seems to be coordinating its actions and steps with the Turkish government. This alignment seeks to brush the Armenian Genocide under the rug and move forward rather than holding Turkey accountable for its past actions. Now, since the government of Armenia itself is no longer pursuing justice for the Armenian Genocide, but on the contrary, is effectively impeding it, it is incumbent upon the rest of us to redouble our efforts in this regard until a government comes to power in Armenia again that reestablishes the importance of justice for the Armenian Genocide as a state policy in Armenia. As we navigate these complex issues, we aim to highlight the critical work of the ALC and its partners in their quest for justice and reparations. By bringing these efforts to the forefront, we hope to inspire a collective sense of responsibility and urgency to seek truth, justice, and lasting peace for the Armenian people and all who suffer under similar circumstances. Let's begin our discussion and continue this journey of enlightenment and exploration as we work toward a brighter future free from the shadows of injustice and oppression. Join us as we navigate the ever-evolving landscape of ideas and innovation on Novelty. As mentioned, our guest today is Kevork Hagopjian. Thank you very much, Kevork, for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Kevork, let's begin with a little bit about the Armenian Legal Center's mission and its current objectives, if you may.
Sure. The Armenian Legal Center for Justice and Human Rights was established in 2016, following the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, to pursue justice for the violations emanating from the Armenian Genocide, including security-related challenges for Armenia and the Republic of Artsakh. Since 2016, we have been active in pursuing several projects. Currently, our main focus in 2024 is to hold Azerbaijan accountable for the war crimes, the genocidal acts, and the crimes against humanity that committed in the recent years, particularly the genocidal acts that ended with the ethnic cleansing of the Artsakh population, the indigenous people of a land that for 4 millennia, for 4,000 years, was inhabited with indigenous Armenian population. So when it was established back in 2016, the main focus was on pursuing US cases for the Armenian genocide reparations. However, we faced lots of challenges related to the immunity of the state of Turkey and lack of resources. However, since 2020, our focus is mainly on Artsakh related human rights violations, the issue of the prisoners of wars, holding Azerbaijan accountable in front of international forums and arenas like the United Nations or the Human Rights Council, or the mechanisms that exist under the Human Rights Council. And also recently we were directly engaged in submitting the Magnitsky cases that we are going to discuss, I believe, later on.
Very good. So the ALC was established in 2016. That was naturally before the United States Congress recognized the Armenian genocide, and also the president or the executive branch by proclamation. So have we noticed that since those recognitions by the Congress and the executive branch of this government, that it's become easier for organizations like the ALC to pursue justice in practical terms? Because you said that one of the things that the ALC was trying to do was effectively pursue cases for reparations. Has the international recognition, or rather in this case, the United States recognition of the Armenian genocide, made any difference in terms of pursuing these cases in the courts?
Definitely. Well, let me be clear. There is no clear-cut answer to this question. However, undoubtedly, it supported, it helped, it provided further clarity or assurances to the international forums when it comes to the issue of Armenian genocide, because on top of more than 25 countries, the United States was added on the list of those countries who officially recognized the Armenian genocide. So it helped. However, practically speaking, these are more political related discourses and have very little effect on legal pursuits or legal cases in front of courts.
Okay, so I know that the ALC pursues justice in a variety of different forums, including the United Nations and its agencies. But also recently, I heard about the ALC's involvement in the Universal Periodic Review of Azerbaijan. Can you explain a little bit what the Universal Periodic Review is and how the ALC is working in this regards?
Thank you. The Universal Periodic Review is a mechanism where all UN member states undergo a review for their human rights records every 4 years. So every 4 years, the entire member states of the United Nations undergo kind of a review or investigation examining the state of human rights within that particular state, where all member states of the UN, and particularly those who are in the Human Rights Council, come together, review the state, and they propose recommendations for improvements. So the state has the authority to accept or take note or reject these recommendations and go back to their capitals or to their countries and implement these recommendations to improve the human rights records within their countries, whether through policies, whether through laws, regulations, practices, so on and so forth. For the first time, the Armenian Legal Center was directly engaged through the Armenian national committees also and Armenian national offices all over the world to the Azerbaijan's Universal Periodic Review. How the review is conducted is quite interesting. Before the review, it was a 2 years long, very time-consuming, I would say, and detailed, dedicated work that went to that. The review takes place actually based on 3 main reports. The first report is published by the state itself. So Azerbaijan sends a report to the United Nations saying what they have done in the previous 4 years and what their human rights issues are and how they evaluate themselves, which is very rosy, as you can imagine, and it lacks credibility. The second report is published by the UN and it's all relevant agencies like the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the treaty bodies, the special rapporteurs, the working groups, the independent experts, so on and so forth. So all these huge agencies, around 30 treaty bodies, 15 special rapporteurs, independent experts, they submit their reports to the UN Secretariat, and the UN compiles all these reports into one main report called the UN report. The third report is produced by civil society organizations, and it is called Other Stakeholders Report. So the Other Stakeholders Report include all the submissions that are made by civil society organizations, whether inside Azerbaijan or outside Azerbaijan. So what we did, initially, we worked in 2 tracks for these reports, because we cannot influence what the Azeris will write about themselves in their report. Absolutely. So we worked with the UN agencies. So we submitted more than 30 separate reports documenting all the human rights violations relevant to these bodies or the committees or the commissions. For example, the treaty for the kids, for the child, or the prisoners of war, or the treaty against torture, or the treaty, the Convention on Civil and the Human Rights Committee, which is responsible to monitor the Convention on the civil and political rights, the Convention on social, cultural, and economic rights, so on and so forth. So we submitted separate reports to all these UN entities so they can include our summaries, our legal analysis, and our recommendations within their reports. And we managed to get quite remarkable like mentions about Artsakh or about our human rights violations committed by Azerbaijan against Armenians in Artsakh and against the Republic of Armenia. Then we also submitted 7 separate reports on behalf of the Armenian Legal Center, ALC, and ANC's regional offices to the UN Secretariat so they can include in their Other Stakeholders report. So now we have our contributions reflected in 2 main reports, the UN's report and the Other Stakeholders report, and these reports are publicly available. People can go and see if they write the UPR or Universal Periodic Review Azerbaijan, they can access to these reports. The review took place in November 2023, a couple of months ago. And we went there and we invited Artsakh's former ombudsman Artsakh Beklarian and the former state minister, and we attended Azerbaijan's the UPR session. It was quite an appalling experience because for 4 hours Azerbaijan, fueled with huge political and diplomatic resources, they brought a huge delegation consisting of high-level state officials to fabricate the story, to
present
promote
Azerbaijan in the most positive light.
Exactly, as if they are the beacon of human rights. They are the most developed, the most advocates for human rights, and that they were blatantly accusing Armenians for being occupiers and perpetrators of crimes.
Can I ask you a question right there? Was there any resistance to the efforts of Azerbaijan to portray itself as such by the government of Armenia itself? Or
yes,
there was?
There was, because these are all publicly available records. The ambassador of Armenia to Geneva tried to intervene at least 3 times. Afterwards, they didn't allow him to continue. We were there as a civil society organizations on behalf of the Armenian Relief Society because ARS has ECOSOC status enabling us to attend the event. And meanwhile, I should also mention that we also worked with with our ANC officers so they can advocate for pro-Armenian recommendations within their own foreign ministry, because, as I said initially, all member states do the review. So to respond that fabrications and distortions of facts and accusations, we organized a side event at the Human Rights Council, where we invited prominent scholars like Professor Massimino from the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, representative from the World Council of Churches, along with Artsakh Beklarian and myself, to have a panel to present our views and what happened, and to argue for at least the right of return for the Artsakh Armenian, and the right for self-determination for our compatriots in Artsakh.
I'm going to pause right there and ask you a question specifically on that topic. So the Azerbaijanis would like to portray the situation as if the Armenians of Artsakh decided themselves unilaterally to flee or leave the land, of Artsakh. Can you give us some examples of why that's not necessarily the case? How there were human rights restrictions in place that would basically make it impossible for the civilian Armenian population to remain there, because otherwise the Azerbaijanis would like to portray a situation where the Armenians were welcome to stay under Azerbaijani rule, but they just decided to leave.
They tried to sell this story during the review process also. However, those who have a little bit of logic and those who have a little bit of understanding of the region and the history of the region, they cannot be fooled, because you cannot say people left unilaterally after imposing on them 10 months long blockade, after starving them to death. Let's not forget, we had people who died because of the starvation in Artsakh.
And even while they were trying to make their way to Armenia, several people
died. Several people died. And let's not forget the pattern of perpetrations, the genocidal policies, the Armenophobic discourse within the state of Azerbaijan, from the top leadership to the public levels, and also the crimes committed starting from 2016 and 2020, where 30,000 of our compatriots were forcibly displaced from their homelands, and heinous crimes were committed in terms of killing, torturing, detaining, executing without judicial procedures, detaining, forcibly displacing, the forced disappearance cases of hundreds of Armenians. So these are all clear indicators that there was no guarantee for the Armenians to remain alive. So that was the only way to survive the imminent death or the imminent threat that they were facing. So therefore, all these arguments that Armenians left unilaterally with their will, and we allowed them to go, and they are welcome to come. Even they created an app for the Armenians who would like to return, and they were making very quote-unquote interesting remarks to sound like modern and to sound like they are quite progressive, by saying that they will turn all these lands that they liberated into smart cities, and they will be in line with UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But we know what the reality is. We know how our ancestral lands are being desecrated. We know how our churches, how our monuments, more than 6,000 pieces of historical, cultural heritage are under the imminent threat of being destroyed or distorted. Let's not forget what happened in Nakhichevan. So we have a pattern, we have a history that clearly indicate that we cannot rely on what they are claiming.
Absolutely. Not to mention that even today we're seeing Azerbaijan continue to try to desecrate and remove all history of Armenians on that land, claiming that our Armenian churches are actually Albanian or Caucasian Albanian churches. So it's a state policy, by the Azerbaijani government to try to minimize the fact of Armenian existence there. And who's to say that if the Armenians stay there, that they wouldn't even be forced ultimately to renounce the fact that they're even Armenian, right? I mean, at some point they're saying they're not talking about individual Armenian civil liberties or rights to exist within Azerbaijan. They were basically, even their so-called integration was, you need to integrate into Azerbaijani society and the Azerbaijani government. And part of Aliyev's notion there was that you're not going to have any different status, right? That was something that even before the recent conflicts, part of what Azerbaijan was proposing as a solution wasn't even to recognize, level of autonomy. You're saying you're going to integrate into Azerbaijan, become just like another district.
A minority. So this is the main problem. You remember this discourse of Pashinyan lowering our bar?
Yes.
And it was all about getting rid of the right of self-determination and accepting a status of minority within Azerbaijan. And this is quite dangerous. As an expert, as a PhD in minority rights, I cannot see Armenians having the status of minorities within the state of Azerbaijan for the reasons that I just mentioned, for the genocidal policies that this state has, and not only they have on policy level, but actually they act upon them, they implement them. Therefore, we cannot talk about minority rights when you are facing an imminent threat of being completely erased from your lands. So it's not about minority rights, it's not about the right to existence or the right to enjoy some cultural rights. It's about their fundamental right of self-determination to live on their indigenous lands the way they deem proper. And this was the case for centuries for Artsakh Armenians. And lowering that status to mere minority rights under the pretext of territorial integrity is not justified, because territorial integrity is not higher than the right to self-determination.
Which is also guaranteed by the United Nations Charter.
Absolutely, and it is the first article of the Convention on the Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights.
So some argue that these rights were effectively given away by the Republic of Armenia's current leadership, namely Prime Minister Pashinyan, when he recognized that Artsakh is part of the borders of the current state of or Republic of Azerbaijan. As an expert on these matters, I'm going to ask you, legally speaking, does the Republic of Armenia even have the right to recognize Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan? Because ultimately, the Artsakh Republic itself declared independence from the Soviet Union at the same time that the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic, kind of ceded from the former Soviet Union. So even if there was some kind of a bilateral agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan recognizing one another's borders, that should not supersede the rights of Artsakh's population to self-determination, to be able to cede from what was Soviet Azerbaijan, right? So arguably, does Pashinyan even have the right? And does his recognizing Azerbaijan's sovereignty over these lands effectively give away the right for the Artsakh Armenian population to demand its rights for autonomy, independence, whatever status they choose to live under?
The answer to your second part of the question is definitely not. This is an absolute right that belongs to the Artsakh people alone and their elected officials and their... let's not forget that the Republic of Artsakh used to be one of the most democratic states, even not recognized within that region. And those who can officially talk or represent the Artsakh people are the officially elected representatives who are currently held in Baku and going through quite difficult and challenging times. Recognizing the territorial integrity of another state is a political statement, and it doesn't prevent the Artsakh people from claiming their fundamental right of self-determination.
Pashinyan himself recently made a statement that said, where he kind of cynically stated that he's not the prime minister of historical Armenia, he's the prime minister of the Republic of Armenia and its current borders. So if that's the case, then at the very least he should recuse himself from even discussing about the status of Artsakh within Azerbaijan or whether that's Azerbaijani land. But unfortunately, we see that that's not the case. It seems as though that the statements coming out of official Yerevan are more and more coordinated with the Azerbaijani state. And in light of these recent developments, it's important that there are organizations like the ALC, which was originally founded to pursue rights and justice for the Armenian genocide, but kind of had to pivot, right? Because we're seeing a modern day genocide occurring in front of our very eyes. So on that subject, Kevork, I want to ask you a little bit about the Magnitsky sanctions. I know that the ALC is doing some work there. Can you please talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The Magnitsky sanction is a U.S. initiative where the U.S. government imposes sanctions on all those who commit serious violations of human rights, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, since 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Last year only, the US government imposed sanctions on 78 individuals all over the world for crimes they committed in terms of violating human rights. And we worked, by the way, I must mention that ALC has signed an MOU with the Center for International and Comparative Law, led by human rights lawyer Siranush Sahagyan. Through this MOU, we managed to prepare the cases, and we identified at least 40 high-ranking military and political figures in Azerbaijan who committed, mainly military figures who committed serious violations of human rights, and we submitted 7 cases in collaboration with the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention to the Treasury and the State Department of the US government, requesting to impose sanctions on these individuals. The process is quite lengthy. Each case consisted around 40 to 50 pages of detailed information, analysis, documentations, proof, testimonies, so on and so forth. And let's see how this will end. We are quite hopeful that the US will remain committed to sanction all those who commit human rights violations. And
who
crimes.
ultimately decides on those sanctions? Is it a separate judicial process? Is it a board? Is there a judge?
It's the government who decides. It's the executive.
The executive branch.
Yes.
So basically the president.
Yes. However, let's not forget that we are also hoping that there will be a bill at the U.S. Congress where we will have a bipartisan bill proposing sanctions, which is called Azerbaijan Sanctions Review Act of 2024, to impose sanctions on the Republic of Azerbaijan.
So these would be new sanctions.
Yes.
What's the current status of Section 907?
I'm not familiar with that. As far as I know, they are waived, and there are some works going on to resume that sanctions.
Okay. Couple more questions. So ultimately, we see a government in Armenia that has kind of absolved itself, washed its hands of pursuing the Armenian genocide cause in general. I mean, previous administrations weren't necessarily perfect, but we saw that there was at least some sort of coordination with NGOs like yourself or the Armenian National Committee of America, the Armenian Assembly, and other lobbying organizations worldwide. Is there any cooperation from the government of Armenia today with your efforts in the ALC, or is it very hands-off-ish in terms of what you guys are doing? You have to kind of push the envelope yourselves.
Mainly, we are pushing the envelopes by ourselves through our partners, like the CICL, like Siranus Saagyan, like the Lemkin Institute for the Genocide Prevention, and other stakeholders. Unfortunately, we don't have direct collaboration with the current government in Armenia. However, when it comes to, for example, the pending cases in front of the International Court of Justice, or when it comes to the case Armenia versus Azerbaijan regarding the racial discrimination case or the treaty, we or our colleagues, our stakeholders, indirectly supporting the team who is directly engaged in representing Armenia. I should also mention the fact that ALC, through again Siranus's law firm CICL, since the 2020 war, we represented 120 prisoners of war in front of the European Court of Human Rights. And this is a huge task that we were handling through our main partner in Armenia, CICL, and we managed to successfully, I should underline the word successfully, because it is quite difficult to submit cases in front of the European Court of Human Rights. The court has a very restricted requirements, and we fulfilled all these requirements through our meticulously prepared legal documents, and we managed to represent 120 prisoners of war. We also, through these cases, managed to identify whether they are still alive or being held captives in the Azerbaijani detention centers or prisons. And so far, 50 of them managed to return to their homes, and their cases are still ongoing in front of the European Court of Human Rights. We are also closely following up the case of the Artsakh leadership, and we always demand their immediate release. Although we are very much aware that this is not a legal case, this is a pure political case, and we are dealing with an autocratic dictatorial regime, and we really hope that the international community will play its role to facilitate the release of Artsakh leadership as soon as possible.
Thank you. As we come to the end of today's episode of Novelty, we are reminded of the pressing need to uphold justice, accountability, and the rule of law. I'd like to once again thank my guest, Kevork Hagopjian, for being here today on behalf of the Armenian Legal Center for Justice and Human Rights. And the work that you're doing, which is extremely important, not just for the pursuit of justice for the Armenian Genocide, but also pursuit of justice for Artsakh, its population, our prisoners of war, the leadership of Artsakh that's under arrest right now in Baku. Though the current landscape may present challenges, we must not lose sight of our goal. It's imperative that we work together, remain steadfast in our efforts to seek justice and advocate for the Armenian people's rights. As the government of Armenia shifts its stance, it is our duty to redouble our effort until a government emerges that prioritizes the pursuit of justice for the Armenian Genocide and justice for Artsakh and its population as a state policy. Thank you again for Alpha News for this platform, and thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and enlightenment. Let us carry forward today's conversation as a call to action, an invitation to remain vigilant and committed to the pursuit of truth and justice for the Armenian people and all who suffer under similar circumstances. Until our next episode, stay curious, stay informed, and continue to engage with the ever-evolving landscape of ideas and innovation. This has been Novelty with Levon Baronian. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.